folks. It's Amy from Colorado Mountain Living, and I know we've got a lot of new viewers to the channel. A lot of folks saw the Stony Ridge Farmer episode, and they kind of came over to our channel, so I wanted to welcome you guys and kind of give you one of those videos to do a little bit of a recap on a lot of our progress since we got started. So this video, I titled it, our 5 biggest money savers in our home build. So we definitely, doing most of the job ourselves, like I want to say 95% of the work on building our home ourselves, we were able to save a lot of money. You don't always save money because building a house is really expensive, but there's definitely key areas that I want to tell you about that are were probably our biggest cost savings. So, and I've got some great old footage from way back when, a couple of years ago, even 3 years ago, from our initial getting started on the home build. So, okay, so let's start with number one. Our number one, I think probably our best investment couple led to our biggest cost savings. So at the very beginning of getting all of this started, Brian decided to purchase a tractor for home use, right? Homestead use. And the tractor, although the original investment, was over $27,000, almost $30,000 for this tractor, but Brian was able to use the tractor for excavating the entire foundation of the house. So although we don't have an exact quoted figure, Brian estimates that just the initial purchase of the tractor with the backhoe attachment and the bucket, and we got a few other like box blade attachments and things like that, he believes that the purchase of the tractor was completely offset by the excavation of the house. So just digging out for the basement and doing all the footers, and we've done a lot of other excavation, but if we were to have paid someone to do our home excavation, we probably would have been in that ballpark. And anyone, feel free to comment what you think the value is of doing a excavation for a house. What would that take for someone to come up here, set up big, bulldozer, big backhoes, the industrial type size. It does take more time with a smaller vehicle like a tractor. It's not as much horsepower, doesn't have all that power as your big industrials, but it definitely has paid for itself. So that kind of goes into number 2. So the second biggest savings that we had was doing the septic system ourselves. So, we actually did get a quote on this one. And I think the original quote for installing the septic system was over $12,000. And I'll put the figure up on there, but it was pretty significant. That was for everything. That was for, the tanks and installation and the excavation. But we actually have an entire episode on this, and I'll put a link in the video to that episode, the video on DIY septic system. There was 5 things that Brian did to really decrease the costs of the septic system, and that was to do the excavation ourselves. That was to purchase the plastic tanks versus the concrete, because if you do concrete tanks, that requires crane rentals to pay for that, to maneuver them because they're so heavy. And there's a few other things in the video. I'll let if you want to click to that video and check it out, you can do that. So that was definitely that was one of our significant savings, was doing the septic system. Again, with Brian being a one-man show, he was able to work on this as he had time. So on weekends or on evenings when he came back from work, he was able to really go in and put a few hours per day on excavation. I think he spent one entire afternoon just assembling the tanks, making sure, things were level and having all of the pipe fittings and all of that. And I'll tell you one more thing from the video. We were able to use our own native fill for a backfill in the septic. And not a lot of places you can do that. A lot of times you have to get that on-site material approved, and a lot of people don't go through those steps. But he was able to save on truckloads of backfill septic sand by being able to use our own approved material. So that was great. And then, okay, so we are to number 3, a third biggest cost savings, and that was going back to the foundation of the house. We did our own concrete. So we did not hire a concrete contractor for doing the basement, doing the foundation, doing the footings. We did it, in 2 phases. So this is another one where I'd love to hear you guys' comments. What do you think would be the quote for, about a 750 square foot walkout basement for hiring a concrete contractor? We decided to use ICF concrete forms. So and there's also another video to this. It's probably one of our first few videos that we did for YouTube. So definitely appreciate that. We've come a long way video-wise since then, but I'll put a link to the ICF forms. So insulated concrete forms, we used Quad Lock, and we did a full review on that. So although those materials themselves may have been more expensive than your traditional forms, but that actually allowed us to do the job, or Brian to do the job as a one-man show. He was able to go similar to the septic. He was able to go in after work, on weekends, work as many hours as he could, and not have to rent out concrete forms and expect the job to get done in a full weekend and paying for those rentals. How long does it take to complete a concrete job, right? So he was able to kind of build up these forms, take his time, make sure everything was, to his liking before we were ready for the concrete. And for the footers specifically, we rented one of those line pumps. So it was something that we were able to do without, big concrete trucks coming up here. We didn't really have to rely on that. We were able to get one of those line trucks that kind of pumped it out and fill that all in. And then when we were finally ready because there was more steps other than just, after the footers were done, Brian had to go in and do the radiant heat. And that's another video, the radiant heat install for the basement flooring. So he had to, so we couldn't really just bang it all out in one weekend, right? Or even a full week. It was a long process. And so the concrete forms allowed for that. Appreciating that the concrete job took quite a while. And we also had to wait on appropriate weather. We did have a pump truck come up to do the pour for the basement walls. So that was what we paid for. I think it took 2 trucks, maybe 3. I'll have to go back to that video. But so anyhow, I definitely believe that was a big cost savings, just doing that all without a contractor, doing that on our own time. I'll see maybe in the description of the comments, I'm able to put what we spent on the ICF concrete forms and the actual cost of the concrete itself. But would love to compare those 2 figures, working with a contractor versus working without for doing a full basement. Okay, so now number 4, our biggest cost savings, this was a pretty big one, was doing our own electrical utility line. So we were working with the power company for a while, getting quotes from them. And I think the initial quote from United Power was, I want to say it was $16,000 to run electric to our house from the road. I mean, I can see the road. It's not that far, right? But it was really like a really outlandish quote, I thought, to run electric. Maybe it was, 500 feet. It wasn't not like it's a half a mile, right? So we were going back and forth with the power company, okay, well, what if you brought it, halfway up the driveway, maybe to that lower corner? Even then, the quote was still, $12,000. And so we were for the longest time, we were thinking that it was less expensive to go solar. But when we costed out the solar, just looking at the kit that we wanted to buy, that was over $8,000. And so we're at the beginning of our build thinking, where are we going to get all this money from? How are we going to get all this ready? It's all, the fall months had hit, cold weather was coming. We were thinking, how are we going to make all of this work with, the limited funds that we had? So we're still thinking, going back to the drawing board about, okay, what are our other options? So anyway, we'll have to do another video on solar versus, off-grid, or off-grid versus on-grid, because we were originally thinking, off-grid all the way, but we might get to that. So we might have a backup plan for that. And so we got back to the power company and we asked about what would it take if we just put in a pole at the road, right? If they just came in, put the transformer in, and then we ran our own line. And then that quote was only about $3,000. So, suddenly we're like, hey, you know what? This is something we can work with. And so we decided that we could purchase our own electrical wire, and then we could run that ourselves, dig the trench ourselves, using the tractor, and lay the line down and do all that. Because a homeowner can do that in the state. We just have to make sure you go through the appropriate inspections. So we had our electrician take a look. We had the state inspector come and do a trench inspection. So, this isn't, just going wild, wild west. We definitely were going through the proper channels to make sure we're doing it properly. Okay. So anyway, that was probably our biggest savings, is doing our own electrical line. So if that's something that's available to you and you're finding that you're in a similar situation to us where it's like, how could I save almost $10,000? That's what we did to do that. Okay, and so now we're on to our final cost savings. And this was the big one. This is what people do, when they're building their own homes, is that they decide to do, the framing of the home themselves. So here, we did a timber frame style house. And we were looking at, different companies that supplied the timbers. And a lot of the companies offer to do the mortising, the timber framing, all of the joinery work for you. And so one of the companies that we looked at, this is interesting because it doesn't even include the rest of the assembly, but the cost of the timbers plus the joinery work, quote, for our home was $35,000, right? So that's not even with assembly. That's just the timbers plus the joinery work. So Brian did all of the joinery work himself. That took months. That was most of the spring, from May through June until about July when we started doing the assembly. I believe that the lumber purchase was around $8,000 to $10,000, and so then he saved the rest of the $20,000 by doing the joinery work himself. And we also picked our timbers from a lumber mill that offered, delivery, so that was how we kind of saved on some of that. And then after getting all of that assembled, we had my dad come out, who is a contractor, the home builder for over 40 years. And so he and Brian framed up the house and did the timber frame raising in one summer. In fact, the framing of the house itself, the walls, the stick frame, because we didn't use SIP panels, although we might use them for phase 2. The stick frame framing of the house, they completed that in 1 week's time. So what I'd love to hear, I'll get a quote from my dad, but what is the value of the framing? 1 week worth of labor for framing the house, stick frame build. And we don't have a figure for this, but the raising of the timber frames. So there are other ways that we saved on that. Instead of renting a crane and paying a crane operator, we rented heavy-duty boom equipment to help with raising up the frames and the timber frame styles. So, and you can definitely catch that video at the beginning. It's right in the beginning of our channel where we sort of frame out the house and raise the timber frame in 7 days, I think is the title of the video. And so those are some pretty dramatic clips there. And you'll see here, you know, it was some pretty precarious work, you know, working way high up like that on heavy equipment, and, you know, you're trying to balance a lot of things. So that definitely was probably our biggest cost savings, right? So, you know, you've got a family member volunteering time, helping you with the build, whereas if you were to pay a full crew to frame your house, and that's probably your biggest savings overall. And the amount of money that Brian saved doing the timber frame joinery himself. Now for phase 2, we are looking at more of a log home style and kind of combining that with our current timber frame style, using more of the square edged logs and the dovetail into each other. So it's going to be a little bit more of a blend than like your regular rounded logs. And we'll probably pay for the company to come out here and assemble it in one day, just to save time. So that is kind of what we are looking at that as an option this time around. But initially, I think our biggest, because we were able to do so much of it ourselves, and it did take quite a long time to get those timbers ready. I remember Brian trying to work on them through the winter time. He was even designing the tools to do the joinery work himself. So those are additional videos that you should check out, the timber frame joinery videos. He's made his own jigs to do this work. So that ended up being probably our biggest cost savings right there, being able to do a lot of the joinery work, the woodwork, the framing, completely, you know, DIY, doing it yourself. So anyways, guys, I want to just kind of give you that, you know, some of that old footage combined with our, our efforts to do cost savings, although there's been a lot of occasions where we've had to, you know, pony up and do the more expensive options to save time, or just now that we've got a little bit more income on this side of the build, because we're not paying for as many expensive things as we were, you know, 2 years ago. A lot of the costs kind of hit you at the same time, so you're trying to spread them out so you can work with it. But now we're working with a little bit more time and more money versus 2 years ago when we had a lot less time and less money because of the time of the year. So anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this kind of flashback video, but I thought it would be a nice compilation to kind of have you look at how far we've come and just to learn some tips along the way of how we were able to save money on our build. It's always cool, you know, to get some tips, but you know, overall, when you're saving the big dollars, I think that's what people are interested in, on hearing how you did it and what were some of the best ways that you did to, you know, what were some of the best techniques that you used to save money. So hopefully you learned, you know, a couple of useful tips, and whether or not it's applicable to you, you might be able to pass that information along to somebody else. So thanks for joining, guys. We'll keep you updated on the weekend's projects as far as working on the side of the house and the landscaping there with the stepping, and we'll see you then. Bye now.